Today we have Steve Russell here, and he's going to tell us some stories about his experiences on San Jose and Matagorda Islands. It's going to be a bit different than what we heard from Wade 2 weeks ago. Certainly different perspectives. Steve is one of the original members of the art colony here in Rockport, and you can see his artwork around the exhibit. Particularly, we have some right up here, and so Steve will be standing right under his own artwork. Steve?
Thank you. Thank you for coming. And those of you that wish to talk while I'm up here, please feel free to go ahead. I hate to hear about that marine geologist coming, because a lot of what I was going to tell you today was covering that. What can you say? There's a lot of sand that came down. All right. As things pertain to my memory of growing up here is essentially what I was going to talk about today. And in my school days, I was born here, went to school here, and there was a book in the library that I checked out over and over and over and over. And it was copyrighted 1950. And one of the hurricanes in the early 60s, I think about 61, I don't remember the name of it, but it blew a lot of the windows out in the school and the library, and there were a lot of books that were lost, and the copy of this was among them, so I couldn't check it out anymore. But all those times that I had read this book, and I just never got tired of it, and I have a bad memory, so maybe. So I just got this copy just about 3 or 4 days ago. I didn't think I would get it in time for this talk today, but I was going to reference a lot of how I'm connected to the stories in this book. And quite a bit of it is legendary. It kind of fleshes out history, not all of it. It was true as they understood it at the time they wrote this book. It was written by a group of people known as the Writers' Roundtable. There's about 7 or 8 of them. One of the descendants is sitting with us today, one of the writers. But it lit the fire of my imagination. And it, in a way, I'm a product of the BS that's in this book right now. I compounded it by my faulty memory. So the last couple of days of me rereading this book after whatever the math is, in 61, and my memories of what I had read at the time and how accurate was I. But it's not very. But I wrote my own book, such as it is, which is a compilation of my memories that were inspired by the things in this book. So the difference between the two is pretty wide ranging. And the name of it is Padre Island. So the idea of barrier islands, I take it to mean things like Matagorda Peninsula, which is not an island. It becomes Matagorda Island, and then that becomes Mustang Island, and then Padre Island. And in the 15th century, it wasn't known as Padre Island. It was called, in the Spanish, I won't attempt that, but it's White Island, white sand. It was lizard shaped, as they say. So a lot of the things that happened, there were natural passes that went through these islands, and they've migrated, they've closed, they've opened, closed again, artificially opened. We built the jetties, but like the Aransas Pass, the lighthouse was built there in the, well, we've already been covered that in the history, but in 1850. And it stood in the pass at the time it was built. Well, now it's quite a ways north of the pass. The pass moved south, is what I'm getting there. And then it was fixed by the building the jetties, Pascavallo, and there's a pass that goes into Matagorda Bay and San Antonio Bays. So my family is a Johnny come lately. We came here approximately 100 years ago. But everybody else in here came, that geologist to explain it. It's an inside joke. So I was fortunate enough to have a daddy that was a very kindly man. Most people pretty much love their parents. But my father took time for young people, especially young boys. He took us camping, and we visited all these islands in little shallow drafted sailboats and motorboats occasionally. But my dad and my brothers and I built quite a few sailing craft, and they were real inefficient. You had to be a real good sailor to get home. Headed into the wind and then sail down when we come home. But we would spend several weeks in the summertime, my father and my brothers and I, ranging up and down these bare islands on the inside in the shallow bays. We didn't have ice. We did have a transistor radio, which made a joke one time. There was a commercial that kept running over and over and over. And it, have you had a Lay's potato chip today? You can hear that, you know, after every song, and we were becalmed. And my brothers and I were swimming around the boat, and Daddy was just sitting there, and for hours, when there's no wind blowing, the sun beat on you, you're almost insane. And a little breeze just picked up, and when it did, the boom rippled, and it whacked him on the head. Oh. And the radio at that moment said, "Have you had a Lay's potato chip?" But we didn't have a radio after that. And that's one little commercial. I always think that little breeze picks up. Now, I've had my Lay's potato chip. But we sailed a great deal. And we met a lot of characters up and down the inside of these shelter islands. And one man comes to mind, there's many. His name was Eugene Hartley. And one night, my brothers and father were floundering in our sailboat, which happened to be flat bottom, getting real shallow water. We were in Mesquite Bay, and we were floundering down Cedar Reef. We didn't know the name of it, but it zigzagged. So we kept seeing a light in the distance, which was kind of rare at that time. There wasn't much traffic up there, almost none at all. And this light wasn't where you'd expect to see a light. And then here they suggest these ghost lights of Vincent's from Vincent's Slough. I won't get into that right now, but at any rate, we'd see that light and you wouldn't see it. And in the wee hours of the morning, we stopped on a little shell island, and we often gathered up driftwood, built a fire, and put the coffee pot on, and sat there and visited, and kind of knocked the chill of the night off if it need be. But we were sitting there, and we had the whole world to ourselves, we thought. And in the night, a voice said, "Hello," and it scared us. Where did that voice come from? And this man was in the edge of the darkness where our little campfire was. And so he advanced into the light, and it really, it was comedic and scary at the same time. But, you know, those pictures you have where they characterize a survivor on a desert island. You know, it's always the pants rotted off, barefooted, beard. Well, this man fit that bill. And he came into the light and tentatively, and we invited him sit at the fire and have coffee. And his shoes he had wrapped with inner tube because of the shell out there. And the man was not shipwrecked. He was there by design. He wanted to be there. And he was what is known as a consultant engineer, which didn't mean much to me except he had an education. And this man pretty much changed my life in a way. He had to set the stage. This was in the late 50s, and it was common for people then to think about nuclear holocaust, bomb shelters, television programs that were on that would scare the bejesus out of everybody. And so there was a certain consciousness in this country about being annihilated and who survived, whatever. And this man, I don't think was particularly frightened by that, but he was seeing if he could survive by himself in a wild environment like that. He wasn't a hermit. He was a friendly man, and very well read, and he had a little driftwood hut that he had built that he had to crawl into. And he had a Coleman lantern for lots of reasons. One of them was cooking on it. He had a pan he set on top of the lantern, be hot enough, and he'd cook his little meals. So the light that we kept seeing was his lantern inside that little driftwood hut. It would be lined up every once in a while. From quite a long ways away, we'd see it, and then as we went down the reef, we wouldn't see it. So we made the assumption maybe there's a boat anchored out there, and it was swinging on the anchor. Well, it wasn't. It was this island. And that Mr. Hartley had gone to sleep without turning his lantern. And that's what we're seeing. And he heard us talking and making coffee. So he sat down and joined us, and we were camped actually on another island. But after the sun came up the next morning, we went and got our gear from the other island and moved over. And this island that he was on, the name of it is Cedar Dugout. And it was a product of what we refer to as the old intercoastal. And it had lots of salt cedar trees on it. And it was quite large. Hello, Mom. At the time, and in the years since then, there's very little of that island left. But it was pretty lengthy when this man lived on it. And he lived off mainly what he could catch. He even ate a seagull. He got caught in his truck line just to see what it was like, and I agreed he wouldn't do it again. There was some nuclear device that cooked off there. Never get that taste of it. So Mr. Hartley was such an interesting and likable fellow that we spent several more days on that island because we had no destination or time schedule. We were just away from Rockport and headed toward we always went to the Coast Guard station out in Pascagoula in Fort Connor. Used to be out in the past, but at any rate, we visited this man and just fascinated by his existence out there. And we had at the time, there was a game warden here in town that had flew an airplane named Tug Mullinax. And Mr. Mullinax knew about this man existing on that island, and every so often he'd drop a little package. He'd fly over that island, and one was a newspaper, and maybe some canned food, or just little gifts he'd toss out. And so every once in a while, Mr. Hartley would come to Fulton to get gas for that lantern primarily, and fresh drinking water, which is good. So there's a lady wanting to get in the door back there.
How did you come down, Steve?
He didn't swim.
He had both.
He had, thank you. He had a boat, and he was trying to sail this boat, and he built his mast with driftwood and carved wooden pegs, and he had sawn a really bad sail out of a pup tent, Madigan Park, Aransas County. And he put a keel on his sailboat. It was a skiff that he had converted, but he didn't know it, but it was too long, so the boat would sail just like hell going one way. When you wanted to turn around, it wouldn't. But you had to drop the sail and roll the bow around or get out and push it around and sail like hell. But it wouldn't go into the wind, and he didn't know why, but my father did. And we didn't have a saw, but we had hatchets and axes, so he his skiff up on the side, and my father took the hatchet and started chopping the keel on Mr. Hartley's boat. Because Dad was pretty savage with it, but it wasn't the polished work that Mr. Hartley had done. But everything, they put it back in the water, took off, and it came in the wind and turned around. But it was technologically a big thing for Mr. Hartley then to sail into Fulton and get what he needed. And then one time he was headed back to his little island, and the wind quit and the fog moved in for several days. And he was trying to sleep in that little boat. It's not, you couldn't sleep on the beach because of snakes mainly, coons and things. So it was a very uncomfortable night for him. And then when the fog finally lifted, he was about 30 yards from his island. And so for some years, a couple of years, we'd be out in our crummy sailboat sailing, and we'd see a sail off on the horizon, and oftentimes we could tell it was him because of that really crappy sail he built out in the camp. So we'd sail together, and sometimes he'd be asleep in the boat with the tiller tied off, and he would head into the wind and fall off and sail on, so he didn't have to tend it. And he'd lay in the bow and read the book, and we hollered at him to scare him to see his feet come down, and just ecstatic that there were some people we'd drop the anchor, put the coffee pot on, and visit. So at any rate, that was one of many, many characters my father, and in part myself, worked up and down the coast of Texas doing seismograph work for searching for oil. And these people always look in the muddiest, most awful place for oil. They don't go downtown lashes, there's a beer joint or something. I gotta go out for the mosquitoes and snakes. But at any rate, we'd bump into people that were either going one way or the other from Rockport. And this being a coastal port, it was common to see somebody up around High Island or north, and they would be heading down this way. A month or so later, they'd call when they got to town and ask for my father's invitation to stop in and eat with us and visit. So people on all sorts of sailboats. And my mother was somewhat chagrined. Short notice, that we found some friends and just came. So there was people that have their logbook, and sometimes they'd bring it with them, that they had been sailing for months, if not years, and they would record happenstance, or events, and we'd sit there very simple evenings visiting with these kind of people. And as for the ones on the islands that I was most associated with were the cattle end of it. And Matagorda Island and St. Joe Island, and being a young person here, it was common for us to work on those two islands, even in the summertime or on weekends. My personal relationship was more with Matagorda Island early on. And that was when Mr. Wynn owned the island, Toddley Wynn. And so there was, like any ranch anywhere, and you have cowboys that are always on the move. They don't stay very long, usually, most of them. So these people would have stories from ranches inland or up and down the coast. And Mr. Wynn had several ranches. He had people that worked in the in the ranch house, and then some of them worked both ways. They could work cattle, or they could bring tea to the mayor of New Orleans, Governor of Louisiana, Arthur Godfrey, those kind of people, John Wayne. But they were equally comfortable in the saddle. There was one man, who was a black cowboy named Rabbit. All these people I'm naming had one name. Like motorcycle people, Skull and Snake. But Rabbit and Pop, Bud, and those guys were free-spirited folks. And one of the stories that it's more modern, that is when there was an attempt to start a space agency, a privately capitalist effort by a man named Hanna, as a businessman from Houston. He was interested in putting up a rocket. And I thought that Mr. Wynn had grub-staked this thing. He did in part. He was the first investor, but I thought it was totally his. And it was somewhat comical in the sense that to satisfy all the government entities that look at a project like this, when you're going to shoot a missile off, you don't want it to go through a commercial jet or hit a schoolhouse over somewhere. And these people are going, there's not enough fuel in there for the thing barely get off the island. So the first rocket was named Percheron, and it's a French entity. It's a Frenchified name of some marshes that were roaming around parts of France. And the first rocket was a liquid fuel rocket. And so they had it set up on Matagorda Island to launch this rocket into the low orbit. And a rocket at its highest point is called apogee, as I recall. And there was a cooling pond right where they were going to launch this thing, and it had an alligator in there named Ralph. And there was a lot of German rocket scientists that came and worked on this project. So they had their own little micro world out there. And the day came where they were going to just run a test. Oh, when they were bringing that rocket here, it was on a truck coming from New Mexico, and the highway patrol stopped them. And they didn't have the right paperwork, so while the so somebody distracted them, and these guys took off, and then they traveled by back roads all the way across to get here and loaded on a barge. Mr. Wynn had boats that would haul cows back and forth from the sea gun. So they put the bulk of that rocket or its components on there, moved it over the island, set it up at this pond I just described with Ralph in it. And they were going to just do a test of the engine, a test fire. And the comet is completed, went afoul, and they couldn't shut it down, and the rocket is latched. And they were just going to run up to maybe 1/4 power to see that the sequence of valves to open the fuels. And it got away from them, and they said that part of it reached an altitude of about 250 feet. It exploded. And then all this crew they didn't expect this explosion, and so it started grass fires everywhere, so they had to just stop what they were doing and wet blankets. As if Ralph wasn't concerned about it at all, he was going about his business looking for frogs. The Germans were out there beating the grass fire out and smoldering cow patties. So that was the first attempt, and the second one was a rocket they named Conestoga, and it was a solid fuel rocket. And I don't remember the date, but they built a new launch pad, set this rocket up, and we had people came from far and wide, New York, and all over journalists that wanted to see this rocket go off. So anybody that had a boat could make a few bucks hauling them over to Matagorda Island. And during the night that they were getting ready to launch the rocket, well, Mr. Wynn died. And they had already put him on the plane to he was still alive, He had a convoy out there, a large plane. They were sending him back to Fort Worth to hospital. He died, and then the sun came up, and they'd already scheduled that rocket launch, so they had a moment of silence and touched it off. And it went a little better than the first one. At least it got out of sight. But it's out in the Gulf somewhere. It was not a reusable thing, but that ended the attempt to space agency happened to be founded on our little island of Matagorda. So for a brief moment, somebody years later, I was in a restaurant somewhere, like say in California, and the waiter said, "Are you the guy that blew up that missile down in Texas?" That was his only claim to fame, Mr. Hammond. So we moved now over to St. Joe Island with my focus a little bit. Are y'all needing to get up and stand up or shake it out? I don't see anybody sleeping yet. That's always a danger. And we've all heard the history of how that island came to be in its present day deal. Back to my father again, he worked over on that island for a while running a boat while the island boat was being rebuilt. And it took about a year for that boat to be finished. And so meanwhile, my dad was just contracting on the boat. So when he went over to the island every morning, he didn't have anything to do until that evening, at which time he'd take people that were coming back to this side. So he's not a man to sit idle, and so he would just go around the island and see problems that could use a solution. He could think of really neat ways of solving simple solutions to problems. And Mr. Bass noticed a lot of these things. So Mr. Bass's mother and father-in-law would come down, and they'd call them the old folks. And they, anyway, my dad would take them and just, let's go beach combing or take them fishing or whatever. And so they always liked my father for the kindness he showed them. So after that job was over, well, Mr. Bass wanted my father to continue on over there, and there was he didn't want to because he needed to be home at night. I had a profoundly retarded brother that he was the center of my parents' life, and Daddy didn't want to leave my mother with him. So every night he wanted to come home, but there was a house on the right here. This painting, if you can see it, a painting I did one year. I stood in the back of a pickup because the snakes were so thick around there. And that very simple little house was out, no electricity. And my father left a radio there with a car battery, so in case my mother needed help, he could come and get her. So my mother and that brother, but at any rate, Mr. Bass kept offering through the foreman of the ranch at the time was a man named Mr. Kiger, and he was a friendly fellow, and we loved him. But anyway, John Kiger would come with an offer from Mr. Bass for Daddy to go to work over there. He said, "I'm sorry, I just can't do it." And so Mr. Bass kept upping the ante, and finally it was it was ridiculous to walk away from what he had offered. But the thing was, what is he going to do? And so he didn't have a job description. And the thing was, he could do whatever he wanted to. And I'll give you this one example. Cheryl, my wife, and I had a shrimp boat at the time. We were oystering one year in Mesquite Bay, and we were getting some really nice big single oysters. My father approached me about buying the entire load of oysters. I thought, well, that's a lot of eating right there. And he said, and you don't have to call them or anything. I just want to buy the whole boatload. and I can't charge my dad. And he said, no, I'm paying. So we went up and we loaded the boat up with these giant oysters, and he said, deliver them to St. Joe Island. So that made sense. He's gonna open those for the basses and everybody. So we got over there and tied up in the boathouse, and he wanted us to take these scoops, and we were just throwing the oysters overboard out in shallow water across this jetty that was over there. So we throwing these oysters out in the water that were about knee deep. Well, the next time Mr. Bass came down, Daddy told him he handed him a nail apron and had an oyster knife, some crackers, and a bottle of hot sauce. He had one, and one for Mr. Bass. He said, let's go eat some oysters. And Mr. Bass said, well, where are we going? He said, down by the boathouse. And Mr. Bass said, there's no oysters down there, haven't been since the 30s. And Daddy said, well, trust me. I got in the Jeep and waited out there, and look at the size of the unknowing to Miss Bass. So it was little things like that, little surprise. So my father had something like that going on all the time. That was a joy, you know, so the Basses oftentimes didn't come down here years at a time. Mr. and Ms. Bass. Their children sometimes would come, the ones that are the Bass brothers now. But they would come and bring their college friends, and they'd hunt deer or something. And they'd shoot holes in that house. They didn't know that anybody was in there. And so they, without complaining to the big guy, you know, like your kids are about to kill us down here, they decided, okay, during hunting season, they stay over here in this house. So when we were over there, we knew the kids weren't around. But we spent several holidays in that house. One memorable one to me was Thanksgiving, and my father had built some big beach things that you go out in the surf, and we'd catch an awful lot of fish, and we came back and fixed them for Thanksgiving, and just had a feast up there. But anyway, that house had fond memories. It's long since been burned down. That house was there originally. It was on the north end of the island, and they had what they call the North Corral and the South Corral. So all these fences that are around out there are corrals where they work cattle. But you could stomp that floor, and it would light up the rattlesnakes. Another just little tidbit is there was a screen porch, and my mother liked to, she had what they call a life list of birds that she wanted to classify in her lifetime. So she would mark off, and she had a lot of birds. Well, coons turn out they like, they're kind of agreeable. They would break into that porch and steal her bird seed. So Daddy would dip snuff and sit out there in the evenings with a rifle. Those coons knew how to open a button on the door. And when they reached up, that was the last thing they did. Let them have it through them. But at any rate, that was when Cheryl and I would visit over there. I did a lot of painting on that island. It's a wonderland. Absolute paradise. And we had the run of it, so it's kind of like the Basses just borrowed it from us. we got to come and go and with their blessing. And so we had everything. It was the hunting and the fishing and the painting and knowing those people were over there, those cowboys, would just absolutely keep you in stitches all the time, listening to them. And so I could keep up a lot longer than you can stand. And I want to switch books here for a moment, just kind of, there's an old photograph of the type of sailboat I was talking about. I doubt that you can see it very well, but that's it right there that we built. And this was our finest hour. There were a lot of boats that evolved into this one. And my mother sewed the sails for us, which is an absolute art form. And it took her years to perfect it. And so she got so good at it that other people at the time we were doing this, there weren't very many sailboats around there. Not that it was real uncommon, but not many sailors. You know, we were kind of in between the early days of Rockport when everybody sailed, and then you'd be out in the bay, and Hugh Morrison and I played around, Johnny and everybody, in little wooden skiffs that oftentimes had maybe a 5 or 6 horse outboard, which was usually very not dependable. You know, you spend a lot of time cranking. The boats leak, and if you had a peanut butter jar to bail it out, but if you ever dropped your jar, you better hit it with the house. It's hard to splash water out of a leaky boat. And so we ranged around as young people, pretty much up and down the mainland, but when we really got brave and the weather was good, we'd head over to the island, which our parents was always stay where we can see. Well, once you got out, they couldn't see us anyway, so we could sneak off and go. And over the years, it was, like I said, it just filled with adventures. And the idea of no ice or those kind of things that you have now, you get in there with a Yeti cooler, gassed up, got plenty of cold beer, and off you go. Then you drink water out of a water jug. It's usually hot, tepid. But if you were thirsty, it worked fine. But anyway, if you're going to be gone for several days, we'd have canned food, spam and corned beef. And my father was very good at making wonderful meals in a Dutch oven or a driftwood fire. So it's incredible. Shakespeare had said that hunger was the best spice. When it set in the evening, sometimes he would shoot a curlew, which was legal then, maybe a hoobagram. Anyway, he'd shoot a bird. Those things tasted real good. He'd put some chicken and rice. So it was an adventure to have something over a driftwood fire that was courting. You know, anymore you certainly wouldn't shoot a curlew. Don't even say the word hoobagram. But
What's the name of your book and where can we get it?
thank you for asking.
Did you pay her to say that?
Here. The name of it is Notes by Texas painter Steve Russell, and I have them in my studio at home. And they've sold like hotcakes. I only made 12 of them. It's a book, let's call it a coffee table book. And so as an artist, I was going to kind of tag that a little bit, is that the subject matter of everything I did, all these, except for that one, that's the game refuge also. But the rest of them are all in these shallow bays around here, you know, the estuaries. These things were pretty much made famous by fellows that went before me. It was Jack Cowan, Herb Booth, and Al Barnes. Yes, sir.
Where and when was your first art training?
First art training was with a lady that lived here named Kit Dinger, and I was in high school by then, and I was trying to paint for some years paintings that I wasn't technically able to do. I was trying to run where you could walk, and it was mostly frustrating, but I did it all along. I just couldn't help myself. I'd paint. And then Miss Dinger, my mother, signed me up for art class with her on Saturday mornings. I'd go to Miss Dinger's house, and she, you know, I was trying to paint nudes and ships and stuff. And she said, no, we're going to start with basics. And so she started with using charcoal and doing still lifes, oranges and apples and that sort of thing. So she made me go back to basic foundation, which I'm very grateful that she was there for me. And so I painted, and more from there on, I studied with different people. But that was my first formal.
And what year was that?
About 1963, 62, somewhere in there.
Nice.
Yeah.
That was true.
She was a very kindly woman.
She was.
I personally credit her with being a movable force for what we have today. And she was a shy and retiring lady. She did not like adversity or arguing. And so once you get a bunch of painters together, well, all that I just mentioned are going to ensue. There's going to be all kinds of stuff. So she stayed in the background, was a very, very gentle lady, and helped so many of us. And she knew more than the rest of them. So there was Mr. Michael, and he usually gets all the thunder, rightly, I would say. But he had a larger body of students. But I couldn't afford Mr. Michael's class, and Ms. Dinger made it possible for me to do what I did. Yes, sir.
Your primary work in watercolors?
No, sir. I work in everything. Historically, I worked in one medium for a period of time, could be a couple of years. And watercolor came kind of late in it was very frustrating because I kept trying to paint watercolor like you would an oil painting, which is not going to happen. And so once I started into painting watercolor, well, being a local painter and Rockport being as small as it was then especially, it didn't take me long to saturate my market. Anybody that wanted one of my pictures got one. So as time went on and I started painting watercolor, well, I didn't know you did watercolor, so that opened up a new one. So again, I saturated my market after about 2 years, and then I started pastel. And again, I didn't know so it's been that kind of thing. So right now, I'm back to oil again. That I work in every medium that I just like to create beautiful things, or attempt to design. It can be metal or wood, clay, wax, paint.
Back to the boat building.
Okay, that's enough there.
How did you and your family go about getting the wood? What kind of wood? Where did you get it? How long?
I was always a secret.
That's a wonderful question.
I'm curious.
Yeah, well, our very first boat, and when I say we built, sometimes we modified an existing craft, and we had a little wooden skiff, and the motor didn't work. One of my brothers, my father, were out, so it wouldn't start. And he had a pup tent, so he just stood up in the boat and held his they sailed in, and my dad was very taken with how fast you could go. He was using an oar to kind of steer it, so it was a little bit like an Egyptian. And so that excited his interest, so we modified the boat, we decked it over, and we put a mast on it. But unknowingly, the mast was too far aft, and it wouldn't come about. My father hated center boards because you had to cut a hole in the bottom of the boat, and he didn't like that. So we call them lee boards, they're actually dagger boards, but you didn't cut a hole. But in order to have a really efficient boat, you need to have center. At night, when we sail, the summer, there's phosphorus in the water, jellyfish and little marine animals. When they're excited, they light up. And there was legends, about the croc with a shot of star down to please a woman. He drew a bead, and so now we have phosphorescence. That very gifted archer. But at any rate, at night, being down below, and you could put your hands over your eyes and look down the centerboard well, and it glowed a beautiful lime green light, and you look in the wake, and especially when you ran over a cabbage head or something, it would really light up. But power boats really started out, but a sailboat did it sufficient. But the wood, when we got around to where we laid the keel, so to speak, of where we built the boat completely by our hands, was fir, a lot of it, and some cypress, and then some oak. for the bow stem, and we built, the largest boat that we built was upside down. And it took months and months, and after school you'd have, Daddy'd have jobs, and you better have it done when you came back. So, but at any rate, we put planks on the bottom of the boat, at, the bow of the boat and the stern, so the planks went crossway. And when we put the planks together, we had 16-penny nails, and we'd put there and slide the board up against it. So that nail was a spacer, and you left cracks the width of the diameter of a 16-penny nail. So then we'd fasten these boards down and using jacks and things, shave it. Well, our neighbor came over and looked at this boat with those big cracks in the bottom. He said, "That is an absolute stroke of genius." He said, "That way this will sink while you're still in shallow water." The reason for, I'm sure most of you know, but if you put the boards right against each other, when it was in the water, the wood swells up in the bottom of the boat. Johnny would know that shrimp boats that sit in the harbor too long, the cracks, and if you take off out of the harbor, you look down below, but in a little while it swells up. Back to those islands, used to be they loaded cattle on wooden barges, and as the cows came on board, well, the barge was pushed deeper into the water, and they leaked like crazy. So they had 4 points around these wooden barges that had a pump, kind of like a stovepipe with a broomstick, and you could pump the water out. So there'd be a cow barn on each corner, and they'd keep bringing the cows, keep pumping, and after a while, when you got almost back to the main side, well, the barge was swelled up enough where it wasn't leaking anymore. But for a while, it would be real iffy. We're going to have to get out of the harbor. But that's the wood part.
Did the boat sink?
I'm sorry?
Did the boat sink?
Of course.
I knew there was a musical period of your life that you were trained by, starting with, because you played how many musical instruments? A bunch. And I was heard that you started out with Elvis and ended up with Willie Nelson. Is that true, or?
Thank you very much. When you said that, it struck a note. Back to Mr. Hartley, just for a brief moment. This is a little bit tough to describe, but he taught me celestial navigation, how to find your position on this earth by using the position of the stars. And he had built a homemade sextant, we're going to call it, but it was a post that he had dug in that shell island and set it up. And he had fishing spools used to come on wooden spools, with fishing line. And fishermen everywhere would lose it, throw them overboard, but they'd float up with fishing corks and those wooden spools and other things that made it fun to beachcomb on these islands out here. You'd find all kinds of nice things. Well, he put a pin, a wooden dowel, in the middle of the fishing spool and put 2 protractors together. So you had 360-degree gradated. And he built a thing kind of like a slingshot, and it had a fishing cork with a pin through that and another protractor so that you could see the altitude of the star, which was right ascension and declination. So anyway, we already knew where we were. Thank goodness. But during the night, we'd go over there and he'd take a reading on known navigational stars. And so the thing is oriented north and south, via 0 and 180. And so you'd pick a star over here and you'd move this thing around and get how many degrees it was from north. And then at that time of night, you'd look through that cork and move it up and down, and then you can get a reading on how high above the horizon it was. And with that data, you could plot your position. And we were, and I say we, it was he, was remarkably accurate within, say, 5 or 6 miles on a good plot. And so years went by, and I would try to remember how did we do that, but I was always intensely interested, and for a long time I knew how to do it. And now I got to think about the other day, I probably use YouTube and relearn it. But I checked out books and tried to reawaken that ability. And it all started again with that man that was interested in so many things, and he kept running diary in several languages. He's multilingual. So when you look at what he would reference, sometimes like say try to figure out what time this time last year, and he'd go through and I would look at it. Well, your handwriting's awful. Well, no, it was a different language. But he would record interesting happens and things that might be. But anyway, science was, he was interested in that, and the biology and what you could eat and what you wouldn't. So he was, I always found that he set the bar up kind of as a curiosity. You know.
What happened to him, Steve?
I don't know.
How long was he here?
How long is he here?
Yeah, don't know.
Yeah, I'd say about 4 years. He used to come by our house sometimes when he'd come to Fulton. I don't know how he got over to where we lived, but they would find a note on the door that Mr. Hartley had been here. But we would see him in the bay, you know, like as I described when we're sailing, and get caught up in some of his adventures. And he wasn't a braggadocious type guy, you know. But you'd see that his skin was peeling real bad, and he got caught out there and got becalmed, and he didn't have a shade, and the sun just fried him something awful. But I can just imagine being alone and with no commercially available thing. But he took his licks and didn't complain, and there were some others, many others, cowboys that they were just absolutely wonderful people. You know, very interesting, their accomplishments and the things they can do. And as a young person traveling in their company, I'm fortunate, my brothers and myself, to have gotten to know these people, to have a lead as their kind of a rudder in our ship, you know, guide us through life a little bit. Anybody else?
Who told you what?
Who taught me to play? Comes back to that. Thank you for that question.
I've seen places.
To say that I play is really a assault on music. But I play with them, and it's one of those things throughout your life you learn. And so the violin lights my fire, banjo, guitars, mandolin, and
Yeah.
oh yeah, piano. I never did learn to read music, and I always thought that I would hear something and figure it out by ear, as they say. But my quest was to read music, and I bought a very expensive piano. It was a real smart alecky piano. And I paid dearly for it, and so Cheryl signed me up for class or something. I'll learn with this piano. I said, no, you're not. So I used to go over and take my little book, my piano teacher in Corpus, and it finally melted down to just me and a guy that was stuck in the 60s. So he'd be our out guy, and we'd play our little piano there, the teacher. Right. I built the violin. It took me a long time, and I researched that a lot. And it was a violin, well, that has nothing to do with these irons. one night, we went to an art show. We were invited at the museum in Corpus, museum, art museum. And there was a painter there, Mr. Garcia. And he had been a contemporary of Thomas Hart Benton. They both had painted together in Chicago back in the 20s and 30s. So they had a show of Thomas Hart Benton and Mr. Garcia. And Mr. Garcia was being honored for the first time in his life in his hometown of Corpus Christi. He'd lived there his whole life and had never really, outside of the Hispanic community, no one knew who he was. But he painted a lot of murals around Goliad and churches everywhere. Most people have seen him, but they didn't know that Mr. Garcia painted. Well, anyway, he was in his 90s. It was a stormy night. And we attended this thing. He was given roughly 20 minutes to talk about his life as a painter. And so his children came from all over the world. They all had good educations. He educated. And they came from far away to hear the night that he was being honored. And so he was at that lectern, and it wasn't all that well attended because of the really foul weather. But the light was from underneath, and his shadow was on the wall. And he stood up there and he identified himself. Well, he was introduced, but he said, I've been given 20 minutes to talk about my life as a painter of 90 plus years. He said, I was born in Saltillo, Mexico, and our next door neighbor was a general in the Mexican army and later became governor. And his son, when he became of age, got an appointment to attend West Point in the United States. So the son went up to school at West Point, and he came home on one of his holiday leave and told his father that he was going to marry an American woman and quit school. So I said, I don't think so. And he said, well, Father, if I'm not allowed to do this, then I'm going to kill myself. He said that he pulled his pistol out, put it on the desk, shoved it over to him, and said, a man does not talk of such things. He doesn't. So it was a long silence, and he said, that has nothing to do with my art career, but it's a great story. I got a standing ovation. The words again. Someone mentioned that the shortest after dinner speech was delivered by a man named Plato, who stood up and said, Jack, and pitched face forward into the chicken soup. We all know that story. Oh, yes.
Is that who the Garcia Art Center is named after?
It is. Yeah. Yeah, he was a wonderful, wonderful man. Again, a very simple, had his feet on the ground. Yes, sir.
Did you go down to San Miguel?
I've been through there.
Well, was that when you got out of service? You went to Mexico, where did you
I
go?
went to Mexico.
And did your velvet painting?
You are very well versed. Aren't
Where did you go down?
you? Well, actually, I just went across the border into Tijuana and then a little bit south toward Ensenada. Yeah, I was in Vietnam, and when I got home, I was very confused, very angry, and I didn't like it in the United States anymore. So I decided I'd become a Mexican. And I hopped across the border and found it's not easy. Language kept messing me up. But I had very good friends from there, and we painted on velvet, all kinds of things. And then one of the storms hit here, Hurricane Celia. And my mother had stored all my worldly goods in a boat barn here in town. The Navy shipped my stuff home, and so she put it in a storage shed that had never gone underwater until that storm. So I came home to see what I had left, and there was nothing. So my friend that I had in Mexico, everything I did was contingent on he and I working together. It was my money and his big ideas. He had cancer and it killed him. So after the storm, and he died, so I just went ahead and gathered my stuff and came back to Rockport. And I couldn't wait to leave this town as a younger man because I wanted to see what does the world hold. And I got out and found out that, boy, it's a nasty place out there. And then here, you could leave the keys in your car, you didn't lock your house. Your clothes were safe on the clothesline. You knew everybody in the post office, the grocery store. Rockport was very small. Most of these roads out here were shell roads when I was a child. And over the years, and there were no red, green lights, traffic flow devices, some stop signs that nobody paid attention to.
That hasn't changed.
Exactly. So over the years, this, like every place, has gotten larger and larger. But if you would have gone out in the bay out here 60 or so years ago and saw how many ducks there were in Little Bay, or you could set anywhere with a can and catch crabs. You could never starve to death in this environment. There's always something to eat. All you had to do is just throw your britches leg up, you'd eat very well. Everybody's shrimp, fish, and then things have changed. It's a little harder to catch a crab now. It might catch you. I think that's probably about it, unless someone else has something they want. Well, anyway, thank y'all very much for coming.